So, they were thieves after all. What should he do now? They might come back to their big black car any time and drive away. How could he stop them? He ran to the car and opened the rear door and looked inside. Under some sacks were more suitcases and bags that clanked when he felt them. Loot from other people's houses. Barney sat in the front seat and held the steering wheel. If only he could drive, he could take the car to the police. He took off the handbrake. At least he knew how to do that. The car began to roll backwards towards the edge of the pit. In a panic, Barney opened the door and scrambled out. With the car still moving, Barney's mouth was open and he held his middle as he watched the big black car move towards the pit. There was a lurch as first one back wheel and then another went over the edge. The car bumped down on its underneath. Perhaps it would stop now, but no. The edge of the chalk crumbled. The rear of the car settled lower, and the front wheels rose slowly in the air, and with a horrible scraping and grinding, the whole car slid over the edge. There seemed to be quite a long time before Barney heard the crash as the car hit the bottom of the dump, but he felt too sick to look. When he opened his eyes, he saw Stig looking over the edge of the cliff, waving and pointing and grinning all over his face, as if it was some great animal they had just hunted over the cliff, and he was looking forward to cutting up the meat. Then he was running off around the pit to get to the bottom. Barney remembered the suitcase and hurriedly hid them deep in a bramble patch before running off after Stig again. By the time he got to the car, which was lying on its back with its wheels in the air, Stig was already hard at work, skinning the leather off the seats and the carpets off the floors. Barney stood helplessly watching. Stig obviously thought that anything thrown into his dump was for him to do with what he liked. But if the men came back and found them as they would be very angry. Then he saw what they would have to do. He got up on the pile of rubbish at the foot of the cliff and started throwing things on top of the dead motor car. Old wash tubs, bedsteads, bicycle frames. Stig soon got the idea. They were burying the animal to hide it from the enemy. Before long the car was covered with bits and pieces, branches and moss. Then, as they worked, Stig suddenly froze into stillness and listened. Barney listened too. There were voices coming from the top of the cliff. Barney crept into the inside of the upturned car and beckoned Stig in too. They crouched on the ceiling, looking up at the seats and the pedals, and listened. The voices of the two men came down from the top of the cliff. "Well, it ain't there, is it? Go on, have a good look." "All right then, it's gone. What do we do now?" "We got a nice long walk, that's what we've got, mate. Or, if you don't like walking, you can run. You seem to like running, all right." "Ooh, likes running? You run too, didn't ya?" "You started running first. Got windy because of a couple of kids were playing. Red Indians, so we've lost the lot. All through you." "I tell you, they wasn't kids. One wasn't anyways." "What was it then?" "It was a thing, I tell you. An horrible thing. Out of that there pit, I shouldn't wonder. Come on, let's get out of here. I tell you, I don't like this place. I'm getting back to town. If I have to walk all the way." Barney smiled at Stig as the voices faded away, and Stig grinned and shook his horrible club. Granny and Lou were back from shopping when Barney struggled in through the front gate carrying the 2 heavy suitcases full of silver. "Barney, what on earth have you been up to?" Granny exclaimed. "I've brought your spoons and forks back, Granny. You see, 2 men came to do the television. I mean, that's what they said, but they were thieves, really, and I was up the tree. But me and Stig chased them away, and I let their car over the edge into the chalk pit, and it's there now with all the treasure in it." "Well, you have been having fun," said Granny. "Now, let's have tea, shall we? Lay the table, Lou. Barney, go and wash your hands. Look at them." Lou started laying the table. "Where are the teaspoons, Granny?" she asked. "In the usual place, I suppose, dear," said Granny from the kitchen. Barney put his hand to his mouth. "No, they're not, Granny," he said. "They're hanging on the fence in Mr. Dickle's field." "What?" Granny exclaimed. "Really, Barney, that's naughty. You know you mustn't take the silver for games." "I didn't take it, Granny," Barney protested. "It was the television man, and Stig was running after him with a club, and I tried to stop him because I thought he wasn't a thief, but he took his coat off and left it hanging on the fence, and the spoons fell out. I thought he was going to have a picnic at first, but then I knew they were yours. I'll go and fetch them." And he ran out. When Barney got back, there was a policeman at the door talking to Granny, and she looked worried. "What's this about thieves, sonny?" asked the policeman. "Yes, I saw them up the tree. I was up the tree, and one of them went into the house, and I went to fetch my friend Stig, and me and Stig had a fight with them, and they ran away, and the teaspoons fell out the car, which was full of treasure." The policeman scratched his head. Now, a car, you say. Just where might this be?" Barney stood on one leg. "Well, I thought perhaps I could drive it to the police station, but it went backwards over the cliff, and Stig thought it was dead and started skinning it, and then we buried it. But I couldn't help it, I promise." The policeman was trying to write all of this down in a notebook, but when he got to the part about skinning and burying the car, he stopped writing and looked hard at Barney. "You wouldn't be making this up, would you, son?" he asked sternly. "I'm afraid my grandson has a very strong imagination," said Granny. "But I'm telling the truth, Granny, I promise," said Barney. "Perhaps the little boy would like to show me where this alleged treasure is, ma'am," suggested the policeman. "Yes, yes," cried Barney. "It's just down the lane, come on." And he took the policeman by the hand and pulled him through the front gate and down the lane, explaining as he went. "It's all in the bottom of the car, the treasure. Or, well, it's in the top of the car, I suppose, because the car's upside down, in the bottom of the pit." He led the way to the top of the cliff where the car had gone over and pointed. "It's down there," he said. The policeman looked over. "Can't see nothing," he said. "Of course not," explained Barney. "We buried it. Come on down and see." The policeman looked more and more disbelieving. "Look, son," he said, "there's 3 houses been burgled in the district, and it's my job to catch the thieves and get the valuables back, and I haven't got a lot of time to waste. What about this treasure of yours?" "It's down there," Barney insisted. "I'll show it to you if you just come down." He led the way round the top of the pit to the way in. It was getting dark now, and the policeman took an electric torch from his pocket. They clambered over the heap of rubbish, and Barney moved aside the branches that hid the door of the upturned car. "In there," he said. The policeman shone his torch inside. There was a terrible mess of ripped leather, broken glass from the windows, scattered stuffing from the seats, and bare springs. No sign of treasure. The policeman sat down on an old washing tub and took his helmet off. He looked quite like an ordinary man. "What's your name, son?" he asked, quite kindly, and Barney told him. "Listen to me, young Barney," said the policeman. "When I was a youngster, I used to have what your granny calls a strong imagination too. Used to play cops and robbers, and I can tell you it was a lot more exciting and a lot more fun than being a real copper, which I am now. So I'm not blaming you. Understand? You imagined you had a fight with two robbers, see? You imagined this bit of old junk, what's been here for years, was a car that went over the cliff. Isn't that it? You wasn't telling lies because you thought it was true, but that's it, isn't it? It never really happened, eh? Barney stood there dumbly. If a grown-up said so, and such a kind grown-up, and a policeman too, perhaps you could imagine fights with robbers and cars going over cliffs. Perhaps he just imagined Stig. He was looking miserably into the darkness of the pit and was just about to nod his head and agree with all the policeman was saying when he saw in the far corner of the pit a flicker of light. Stig's den. He scrubbed away some tears that had got into his eyes and said firmly, "It did happen, and I know where the treasure is." And he went scampering along the gloomy bottom of the pit towards the den. He knew his way pretty well now, even in the dark, but as he went he kicked cans and rattled old sheets of iron as much as he could. He wanted to give Stig warning that they were coming. He felt it would be too much trying to explain Stig to the policeman, even if Stig was there in front of his eyes. He heard the policeman coming along behind him, making even more noise, and he was almost sure he heard a scuffle and rustle that was Stig, hiding himself in his favourite bramble patch. When he got to the entrance of the den, well ahead of the policeman, there was no sign of Stig in the bright firelight inside. He stood by the entrance and waved the policeman in. The policeman doubled himself up and crawled in through the low entrance and gasped. It looked like Aladdin's cave. Necklaces and bracelets hung winking from the roof of the shelter. The floor of the cave was carpeted with the skin of car seats. Stig's bed was made up with padding from the seats and covered with fur coats, and above it, stuck into the wall, was a driving mirror and a set of switches and buttons saying headlights and wiper and heater. And all around the floor, stuck into the ground and set out like tin soldiers on parade, were troops of silver spoons and forks. Stig had been enjoying himself. "Well, I'm blessed," exclaimed the policeman. He took out his notebook. "I take it all back, Barney, my boy, and if you'll just help me tick off in my book all of this stolen property which someone has so kindly put out on parade for us, we'll get it back to its rightful owners all the quickest. And I shouldn't be surprised if there was a reward for a bright boy at the end of all this." Barney started to explain all over again what had happened, but the policeman said he'd had a tiring day and he'd rather not have any more explanations, please. But that time, when he went home from his grandmother's house, he took a brand new bicycle with him, and Stig was disappointed at not being allowed to keep all the treasure, but before he went, Barney found some spanners in the wreck of the car, and he taught Stig how to use them. Stig was very proud of his necklace of steel nuts strung on wire cable and his bangles of piston rings.